That is the entire brief. We don't know what we're talking about. Let's just do it. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. Here we are. I have a small drink because it's Christmas. It's only small, but luckily the bottle it comes in is 2 liters because that's how we do sherry here. Uh,
Sherry. My grandmother used to drink sherry. What are you on there?
it is the
He looks like your
cheapest
grandmother
thing.
as well.
It is the cheapest thing you can get here, and you can also. I like these bottles because this is what I end up putting the cider I make into these glass bottles. But you can buy it in plastic in the bottle store. It comes in like milk bottle cartons. So it does, as you say. I can remember growing up. It was an expensive drink that you had a little sip of it with the vicar or the headmaster, and not the cheapest chips nasty thing.
After you got caned.
After, yeah, or before. It's Chris. Hello, Michael or Mitchell. Sorry, yes, it is the Christmas party version. We haven't really arrived with any topics or anything like that. But I'm going to jump straight in with the shocking news this week that on the very anniversary of the Gatwick drone fiasco, 2 or 3 years, I can't remember now. Three. Yeah, three. There was yet another drone incident at Gatwick, and thankfully, the hero of the hour, as ever, Ian UAV Hive, stepped in to knock it down before it became a big thing. Ian, do you want to tell the world what happened at Gatwick this week?
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought it was a joke, or I thought somebody maybe was reading Twitter from years ago and thinking it was the day, but it wasn't. It was genuinely what was going on. But on the very morning of the anniversary, I think this is around about 9 a.m, so it was pretty early on. There was something going on, a security incident at Gatwick. Now, the police aren't mentioning much about this now, so I think, I'll get onto a bit on that in a moment. But so we hear there's this incident, and then suddenly it's she's a woman called Dr. Federica Biotti, postdoc associate lecturer at the Royal Holloway, whose parents are trying to get over to the UK, over from Spain, and their pilot is telling them that there is a drone incident at Gatwick that's stopping them being able to take off, and continue on with the journey. And then there's other people that are also saying that they're hearing that there's an emergency at Gatwick, and their pilot's telling them there's an emergency. But some other people are being told it's debris on the runway. But obviously at this point, it's not good that we've got drones suddenly. You think there'd be a process in place now. They've got the odd system. After the Gatwick fiasco and all the hammering that the drone community's got since, you'd have thought there'd be just some sort of sensitivity that it isn't a go-to excuse just for any matter that's ongoing where you want to tell passengers, I'm sorry, there's a delay. We don't want you shouting at us. Because really, it was just to placate the passengers. But yes, it turns out since that apparently it was a bomb threat. To be honest, though, whether that's the entire story, I don't know. But it is basically a flight from Turkey that they surrounded with machine guns, so armed officers, had everyone come off, check their baggage, and let them all go on the way anyway. Now, someone that kind of knows a bit that goes on there, or alleges to, tells me that this is a pretty routine thing, in that if there's a passenger that misbehaves, someone has an outstanding warrant, and so on, the police will often go, rather than just send a normal bobby there with a truncheon, they go there with all the guns and bloody blah. And it's a show of force thing, just to stop people being knobs, basically, just scare the shit out of them. So it sounds like this happens all the time, and it was just something very routine, and someone's just been daft enough to use the D word. The trouble is, no one's been transparent about it, because the Sussex police have been asked, Gatwick Airport have been asked, and EasyJet have now been asked of how did this get reflected as a drone. have the police said this as a cover story and thought, oh, well, sod it. And then the moment they realise it's the Gatwick anniversary and people are picking up on it in the media, I thought, oh, well, bloody hell, we better knock this on the head. Or is it Gatwick Airport where they thought, well, it's an emergency, what excuses have we got that we could, on our list that we can use? Or was it just the pilot that was told there's an emergency and has ad-libbed? Because whichever one it is, there is a training issue there that needs addressing and it needs knocking on the head for future. You know, if in that situation, you might, if say there was a genuine bomb threat incident which you thought was, you know, say for example you got it through for your intelligence agencies and you thought there was a terrorist bomb thing, you didn't want to scare the passengers. I mean, you could have just said and kept to this, just being a story, there's debris on the runway. That doesn't worry anybody. And it doesn't, again, just throw a load of mud at the drone industry. So it could have just been that, but that hasn't happened. So there's a question to why now. EasyJet direct messaged me, but they're just trying to make it all difficult so they don't have to do what about it. Because they said, oh, which flight is it? So I don't mind. This tweet they're tagged in has got the doctor, her tweet, and we've even put in the flight number and even a link to a thing that shows where it was at the airport and then it come over to Gatwick. So we've done all the work for them anyway. So they don't have to, and then they're going, oh, would you ask her for a booking number? We don't need a ticket booking number. Just find out
which seat were they sat in?
Instead of why.
Yeah. Well, funny, I was on pull up a sandbag. I was on an Olympic flight many years ago. I don't think they exist anymore, coming down to here. And we were pootling down through Africa, and they bing bong, ladies and gentlemen, and they did say this on the channel, we believe there's a bomb on board the aircraft. We're going to have to divert immediately. And we went straight into Khartoum. And the problem with that was there was a war going on. So there were people with shooty sticks and tanks at the end of the runway. But so they're not afraid to use the word bomb. Well, they weren't back in the day when you're flying. It's fortuitous that Richard's here, actually, because I was wondering if that message had gone out through the ACARS system. There is a notification system to broadcast to aircraft, and I've been trying to see if I can find those messages for the day, especially ops messages. Does any of that sort of thing get put through Altitude Angel, Richard?
That is a good question. And I think for the first time in like 6 years, you may have just stumped me live on air for the Christmas special. I would actually have to check with people slightly more geeky than I am in the company and see if we've got that data. I don't actually know, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it might be a tricky one to find because I think it's just between companies and stuff like that. I don't think it's a particularly open standard, but it would be interesting to see, because it would say something like there's a pigeon on the runway, or there's a streaker, or some little details that have happened at airfields in short messages that appear then on the captain's instruments.
It might not be we typically ingest then, because we want the stuff that we put public. But I could probably look back and tell you if there was a NOTAM about it.
I tried that as well. I couldn't find a NOTAM. I don't know if you looked for a NOTAM, Ian, but I tried looking for a NOTAM as well, and I didn't see anything in that vein. Because because the aircraft that was overseas, the aircraft that her parents were on, wasn't it? So for that message to get there, yeah, it was either made up in the cabin or their ops room sent through a message. Something will have happened, or the air traffic control at that end. Quite how we trace that, I don't know. But yeah, very interesting. It happened to be on the anniversary, isn't it? Very interesting indeed. Oh, very Christmassy, Bruce. I've just noticed.
One thing that was of note, I mean, it was about 2 hours after this had been ongoing, but at least at that point, the Twitter account for Sussex Police jumped in and said it's an incident, but it's not a drone. Before because people then started tagging some of the TV channels by then. So it did get knocked on the head, but yeah, it wasn't good for that particular day. But what was good was the Guardian. They went on the offensive. Funnily enough, this was bang first thing in the morning as well. Was the Guardian went on the offensive straight away, saying it's the 3rd anniversary of the Gatwick drone. In fact, I'll find the tweet and then we can get the wording of it, because it was quite to the point.
Place it up if you want to share it with us. Oh,
so it's Jim Watson at The Guardian, and he said it was 3 years ago today. A drone struck Gatwick's runway. The police missed it because it never existed. They just hope the story goes away. And obviously he's got a link to the Guardian article. Now he's got 250,000 followers, and a lot of these are journalists. And there were other journalists jumping in and saying that they're satisfied that some of them are outright satisfied there isn't a drone, and even those that language was a bit step back from that, and are certainly open to the fact that the narrative we've been given is far from complete, and more investigation needs doing and more delving into the whole matter. I think you did predictions last week, and I wasn't on that, so I don't know your predictions. But my predictions for 2022 are the first human flyaway. I think there's a fair chance of that, knowing we've got sticking consumer grade stuff and telling people to fly in it. So yeah, I'm predicting that for next year. So that's a bit grim, unfortunately. But I am predicting we're going to have. I think we're going to have some good developments on Gatwick. I've actually seen some stuff that itself would make headlines, which I'm not going into.
And we're going to wait for the Netflix show for that.
There have been people saying things now. So yeah, there's definitely some looser lips out there of what's now being said. And I've actually got something in black and white recently that it's not like a smoking gun kind of thing, but it is absolutely hilarious, and I wish I could share it today, but I can't. So that's going to be a 2022. So 2022 is going to be the year of Gatwick.
I'm going to fill my glass up to that, because Netflix are showing interest, I believe, as he fills up his glass.
I can't talk about anything about that.
You can't do it. No. I mean, far beyond.
I did notice, actually. I didn't even know it was the anniversary. I was oblivious to it. I only noticed I had MPs following me. I had various production companies and producers and whatnot and journalists. And I thought, what the hell's going on here? And it was only then that I'd spotted the Guardian tweet. But yeah, I'm happy there's more journalists looking into it now. Or certainly the vocal about it. But it does need more delving into, and really it should have been a public inquiry.
Yeah, Netflix have approached me to play Ian in the dramatisation.
Yeah, quite right. Quite so. Have you got all the sci-fi apparel to be correctly dressed? Because you've got to have your Space 1999.
I have my full Space 1999 set up. I got all the fancy clothes and my all those things. And I look a lot like Barbara Bain when I'm in my makeup.
There he is. He's got the chair poking. He's got the secret lab chair. But what's this?
This actually, if you're a sci-fi geek, this is what they've all been after for months. This is what's called the Space 1999 Tech Manual, and this is the geekery thing of geekery things. So yeah,
is it how to make that awful spaceship, which was just good as an egg on the end?
The Eagle
that's behind you, yeah. It was
it's much more sophisticated than that. It's I think they've been inspired by quite a bit of stuff NASA was doing with that. It's quite a nice, as the sci-fi vehicles goes, it's one of the most interesting.
Doesn't have wings, eh?
But we could actually make that today. The Eagle is an aircraft that could be made today and would really work. I'm not signed on a chapter.
Battlestar Galactica as well.
But I've got the box set. I've got the box set of DVDs. That's got to count for something.
It's good. It's good to count for something. So, well, yeah, and Gatwick was used again. I just then tried to pull up the post from whichever counter UAS company it was, but it was flipping used this week. This week it was used. Just completely unfounded comments from them for justifying their investment. And what I struggle with is when companies do that is, but none of that's true. What you're saying isn't true. So surely your investors now must have less confidence in you.
Was that D-Drone?
No, it wasn't D-Drone. It was another one. But if they're going to spout such rubbish, anyway.
That is what annoys me about it, because I see it all the time. It's used as a marketing tool, and well, we know that it doesn't all add up. And to me, it shows a bit of weakness in your product. If all you can do is sell your product by mentioning Gatwick, all you're doing is being able to use some fear and use that as a marketing aid. Hopefully one day that will be eroded enough where it can't be used anymore.
New Zealand Civil Aviation are using it to justify new rules, or the Department of Transport using it to justify new rules, regulations and restrictions. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I just figured it out. I was reading the Civil Aviation Act today because I'm working out my strategy for this remote drone operation. And the reason they want people to register is very simple. It becomes apparent. It gives you an aviation document. Once you hold an aviation document, they have so much more control over you. And it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes.
Well, we mentioned, Richard might not want to talk about this, but one of the big Gatwick problem proponents was AirMap, who, they've been sold. Everyone wants a UTM, and they are involved in New Zealand, aren't they? I think, Bruce.
Yeah, I think there was a trial with AirMap somewhere. I don't know what happened to it, because now of course, Airways, our airspace controller, they've got their own one, which is the I forget what it's called anyway, but they've got their own UTM, which they've sold to some crazy country somewhere overseas. Everyone's in the business of making a UTM and leading the world, and as a result, we've got this highly fragmented space, and everyone thinks they've got the best product. And so really we have to fall back to Richard to tell us why his product is actually the best.
Well, ours is not a product, right? And anyone who tries to sell you UTM in a box is probably selling you a bit of a fib.
Does yours come in a bag?
It comes in a range of boxes that we post over a number of weeks, and you self-assemble it.
The Almanac UTM.
You guys would love it. Because, it's all kind of exploded diagrams. No, but joking aside, we're aware of Airways New Zealand and their quote-unquote UTM, and there are a few other ANSPs that are in the game as well. I think DFS are also having a stab. But the great news for
sell sofas.
Well, that is one acronym, but if you Google them, the other one you get is Deutsche Flugsicherung, I think, which is the German equivalent of NATS. They will not like me saying that, neither party. So it's Christmas, so we can all get over that. But in a nutshell, I think the interesting thing is the ATM view of what UTM is perfectly fine to the rest of us mere mortals, because it basically revolves around their own estate and their own airports. And I think, the downside of that view is that it's very protectionist and it's very closed. If you then say, okay, can I have an interface so that an army of drone pilots can request to fly here? No one wants to know anymore. And that becomes very difficult unless you then go and download a very specific app, or in some instances you pay a specific fee for that benefit. And that's the exact opposite of an open airspace, right? That's the exact opposite of the way airspace is regulated, in fact. And it's principally because quite often drone flight, in many respects, is outside of the licensed remit for a lot of ANSPs that they can experiment. So I think it's beholden on us all, really, drone pilots, GA, civil aviation, military aviation, to actually dictate what it is we need from this new generation platform. That's what we need. And yes, I do think that our platform is the only one that's doing that still.
Well, help me understand, who's going to have the what do I want to say? So AirMap's been bought by Walmart, in effect, and Walmart want to have delivery drones in America. And then in America, you've similarly got Wing, which have a UTM as well, and then there'll be Zipline. Well, Zipline do have their own flight following software and their own sort of system, but they don't make a big play of it. How it cannot be that there are three different, this is where your interface bit comes in, isn't it, I suppose? But it cannot be that there are three competing systems trying to deliver stuff in city A to city B. And where, I don't understand why that's being allowed to happen.
I think you raise a really good point there, because I think the first thing I would say is when most people say UTM, Wing included, they're really talking about fleet management, right? That's some software that they've got, which helps them manage and organize their fleet of vehicles. And one person's fleet is another person's single drone, and another person's fleet is a mega fleet of drones. But the reality is there needs to be something to help interconnect and synchronize those operations. And then we have to start thinking about ground assets as well. So things like airports traditionally, But again, when an airport deploys an interface, it has a UTM capability, but it is not the UTM. And what we need to think about is what does the government want? In this instance, like if we say we care about military air traffic and we want to keep that secret, there's no way that there can be a possible solution where you have some central service where N UTMs connect into it and download a feed of all the military traffic so we can all avoid it. So we can't all be responsible for our own separation with other air traffic. We need something to do that. And that really, that sort of foundation platform that should be deployed at a national level, perhaps run by an ANSP, although perhaps not in many instances, that is what we would term a root UTM, the very basis for which all cooperation and other UTM systems, service providers can connect into. But again, I think you'll see us going off on a big rant in the company over the next couple of months in the new year, because we see UTM as one of the most abused terms in this industry, because it's actually, you see it all the time in investor reports. There's lots of money going into UTM now. So everyone has a UTM because that's where all the money is. And that term is being really diluted from what it actually is, which is just about information flow. That's really what it's about.
Sounds like NFTs.
NFTs. Yes, yes, you've got an NFT for every flight. Have you seen that movie that's coming out that they're gonna make every frame of the movie an NFT? But anyway,
Richard,
on the NFT subject,
Richard, a quick question. Where do you see the return of investment on those UTMs? Is it the
UTM or the wing UTM? I mean, I think actually, just before I get to that, one of the bits of Gary's questions I didn't answer was why have they all got one? And I think, if you look at a delivery company, what a delivery company typically tends to have is some great drones, has a customer base, and it has some software to manage those, but then it has effectively fictitious airspace within which to work. It can't really scale its operations. It needs something to help it scale that operation and then to do that safely. And typically those companies have not invested in the business of airspace safety. They've invested in fleet safety. So they need something to go ahead and do that. And whilst big companies like Wing will probably always pave their own way because they have that facility, 99% of the commercial industry that's just starting won't have that ability. They won't have 7, 8, 9, 10 years worth of investment behind them to focus on the safety, but they'll have a really cool idea for what to do. They'll have a great product that they want to build. They might build a killer app that they want to use to summon coffee to your house or whatever it is. And they want to plug in that flight management piece. So
I just thought they were getting themselves an entry into a room where discussions have been had.
That's you never know, right? But I think when you acquire a company, right, there's another term for that. It's called acqui-hiring as well. So you get the team and you get all the IP, but equally you get all the things. Well,
what the hell are you getting?
Yes, you get everything, good, the bad, and the ugly. But once you get that, AirMap had Lance approval, for instance, and if you're a delivery company, depending on the price you paid, it's probably cheaper to go out and buy someone who's done it than it is to go through that pain yourself. And actually, the way that Lance is set up anyway prohibits commercialization. So AirMap's original idea, I think, which was to effectively rent its Lance capability to others, couldn't go anywhere. So I think it makes perfect sense for Walmart and DroneUp and what they've done. But I think it also, from my perspective, and it's just my personal perspective, I think it possibly speaks to the fact that the area of UTM that AirMap was focused on was very much more appropriate for the fleet management side of things than the kind of national and the airspace management level, which is where we tend to be looking at. And actually, we do very little specifically to support any one particular type of flight. We're more interested in the overall activity within the airspace and helping to smooth people's entry to it and to smooth the navigation through it. So I think that's where you've got those two discrepancies there. Louis' point on monetization is the $50 million, $100 million, $10 billion, $10 trillion question, right? Because everyone's still, I think, trying to figure that out if you lump everyone in the same box. But the reality is you've got a subset of the community that are trying to monetize drone pilots. That's their business model. And if you're really, really pessimistic, you could say, well, over the next 5 to 10 years, there will be fewer commercial drone pilots because actually the Wings of the world, the Amazons of the world will just automate everything. So if your business model is predominantly based on drone pilots, there's probably not much longevity in that unless you're doing something else other than supporting directly a flight. And then you've got, on the UTM side, you've got different services that tend to fall under that UTM banner that you typically would think about charging in different mechanisms. So you have some that are subscription-based, like our data services, for instance. If you want great NOTAM data, past maps, all of that good stuff, there's a fee for that. It's monthly. It's, come and consume as much as you can. And then there are other services which you would typically activate on a per flight basis. For instance, if you're looking at our tactical navigation solution, then you pay for that when you use it. And the reason for that is when you use it, we incur additional costs because we have to go and get all this extra data and relay it to you, and we take on a bunch of responsibility. So all of that to work though has to work within the context of the person who's actually paying for something to be flown in the first place. If someone's only paying $1 for a 100-mile flight, then everyone's piece of the pie has to come out of that $1. So the economics have to work out overall. And I think that's for me, that's the piece that resonates the most when people say, where's the money coming from? Because the economics for that are still in flux. And to a certain extent, they're set by the people who are building these fleets.
So most of these investments are just like the electrical cars market. So Tesla invested on their own power grids, and the other guys are piggybacking on what others did. So I don't see anyone doing like Tesla that goes both sides, having their own airspace managed and having the transportation within that airspace. Do you see anyone doing like that?
Well, I don't think anyone can actually have their own airspace unless you can afford a small chunk of restricted airspace somewhere. Yeah. But I guess the equivalent would be perhaps building out a set of proprietary services that you use for your vehicles, and then later on, once you've monetized those, offering those out to other people. And I guess the only real way to kind of make that work for AA would be to start building a fleet of drones, which is not something that we're interested in doing. We want to support other people doing that. But that said, we actually have some people who make a UTM, quote unquote, will actually, they buy our services from us and incorporate it into their UTM. And I think that's just, testament to the fact that what we do is we build components that are really quite technical and do some very specific and I'll say clever things for navigation purposes. We also do some other things that would just take so long to build in that if you wanted to start your idea, you'd be 2 years behind before you start because you've got to go through all these processes. So there's that element. And then we also have a bunch of services that we've built that consume all of those little parts and then package them up differently. So a good example would be Drone Safety Map, right? It pulls loads of different services from our portfolio into one easy to use map. And then we've got others like Guardian Enterprise, which is our airport product for helping airports interact with drone pilots that want to go fly there.
So you are to the aviation industry what Lucas Electrics were to British Motor Corporation in the 1980s.
You provide the parts. Go back to my history book on that one. Satan.
Young man. But Mitchell's saying about an interface with air traffic navigation services. I know that you provide a flight strip service, i.e. you can spit the information out into the flight strip that the controller have, and that will feed into his normal working system. So the unmanned aircraft, if you will, just becomes another track, another strip on his day.
I mean, that's such a cool question because it's one of the fundamental bases of which I started the company years ago. Is surely if we can just solve this problem technically, then everything is going to be good. But the reality is when if I held in my hand a magic internet cable and I walked up to a made up ANSP and I said I could give you every single drone flight in the country, where do I plug this? They wouldn't know. And actually those that had thought about it would then turn around and say, probably nowhere near me because my controllers don't really need to know about 99.999% of all of that traffic. All we need to know about is something that is in our airspace that is potentially a hazard to anything that we're managing. So those interfaces, the technical interfaces, exist today. Getting, for instance, an ANSP to open that infrastructure to an organization or a group of organizations to interface with it is a challenge. And there are a few that are doing it, and they're really pioneering. But for others, I think it's potentially viewed as an erosion of the control that they have. Today, most ANSPs are a closed shop. They'll offer a service over a VHF radio to anyone, right, with a VHF radio license, but that's the boundary. That's the interface boundary, and everyone's safe. But if everyone is able to then tap into the infrastructure of that ANSP, the radars and other bits that they've deployed and spent hundreds of millions on, sometimes over many, many years, then suddenly their revenue model looks a bit shaky, and that's a problem. So that's really where a lot of this stuff is starting to stumble. So I think that's why sometimes you've seen ANSPs venture a little bit too far out to the right potentially and say, right, we're just going to monetize everything that comes into our airspace. And the reality is, I mean, they do that with commercial flights today. You know, scheduled flights, they're paid for every mile, etc., per ton that they carry. But if it's a drone flight, we all get a little upset, and sometimes quite rightly, about the notion that they might impose a fee because they have to. They have to come up with a way that they can monetize the investment that they've made.
What was the service they were providing for that fee?
Well, that's the other element to look at. I mean, we've always been very much on the view, and you'll note that still all of our operator-facing products, all of our drone products, don't charge for anything, because we think if you're going to charge for a thing, you should get something for that thing, right? So, I mean. What if
guys, you got taxes? You pay taxes, and you don't necessarily get what you pay for. You just pay to exist.
Well, I mean, that's a cynical view. I mean, I'm not necessarily a massive supporter of taxes, but you could argue that civilization, as we know it, would fall apart without a bit of tax. But going back to putting this back to ANSPs, I think the ANSPs could, for instance, offer a premium service, right? So instead of taking 30 days and requiring a fax and several phone calls to get a decision, if you've got an urgent job to do for a customer that needs that, that property survey or that piece of infrastructure done right now, they might be able to charge a tenner or something for an immediate turnaround time to jump the queue. There are other options I've seen explored, which is where an ANSP says, okay, I've got a lot of visibility in my airspace that you don't necessarily have as a drone pilot. If only I had a mechanism where I could take my radar information, and when you want to go flying, you tell me in the app you're going to go fly, and I give you my radar information. So you, when you're flying, Mr. Pilot or Mrs. Pilot, you can see everything I can see. And they're talking about saying, okay, well, that allows us to offer the service and to open up the otherwise restricted zone, but equally to offer something in exchange for a small recovery of the fee. And I'm not saying we support one or the other, but I'm much more in favor of the concept. If you're going to ask someone to pay, they should get a service. They should get something commensurate for that fee. But again, that still has to stack up. I say, if the drone pilot's only getting $1 for the flight, they're not going to pay $10 for the permission. It's not going to work. So again, it can't be seen as a cash cow. And I think when we talk to ANSPs, in particular, we talk to them about this being a very evolving landscape. And today the numbers are really, really small. And actually, it's not Joe, the drone pilot, that you're really interested in monetizing. You're more interested in the potentially hundreds of thousands of aircraft, UAM aircraft, that are going to head your way in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And you want to have mechanisms in place to make sure that they can use your.
Well, they're just going to be standard aircraft. They're manned. They're just be talking and squawking in a normal way.
Well, I think that's the challenge now, isn't it? Because all these things are crude still. So you still have all this many billions going into electric airframes, et cetera, and they all talk about these being automated. But we all know that majority in the interim period is going to be a person flying hands on stick and throttle, right? That's just what's going to happen.
They're not going to let these things be automated. It's not.
They'll get there. I fully believe that's coming.
These automated taxis. If there's a flyaway next year, as Ian predicted, right, that'll set them back years, because it's already years before they're going to allow it. Because I've already said now you're going to have a pilot in there you know, for these air taxis, they've already said now already they're going, hang on a minute. So you've got to have a pilot, you've got to have someone that's qualified, which will probably be a helicopter pilot, is its nearest thing. You know, there's no certification yet, even to get that pilot certified. And then you want to take them out in, say, 5 years' time. That technology is going to, you know, it's still not going to be right. Taking away the pilots, another, 10, 15 years away, maybe?
No, sorry, no. People are getting used to autonomous vehicles. Look at what what Mercedes has done in Germany, certifying their level 3 autonomy. Look at all the Roombas that people are getting for Christmas that navigate inside the house.
Well, killed my cat.
Sorry, Roombas are driving on the roads in Germany. Is that
they are.
Hey,
you know what worries? What worries me the most is someone's going to get killed in one of these flying car things, and it's going to be put down as a drone death.
Of course it will. Of course it will, Bruce. Well, here's the thing. So automated vehicles driving, I mean, the best system out there is probably Tesla.
No, it's not. It's nowhere near the best. It's only a level 2
You
system.
set everyone off now.
Come with me if you want to live.
You stepped on the Tesla landmine.
Tesla's probably got the best automated.
It's got one of the poorest systems. It's a level 2 system. It's level 4 that's your proper autonomy. So they've got a fancy cruise control. That's all it is, and that's all it can be because it hasn't got the physical hardware to be more than that. That's the reality.
Milton Keynes wins again.
Another LiDAR fan. Oh, God. This guy is a LiDAR fan.
Yeah, so you don't need LiDAR. You don't need that.
You can't do the cameras are flawed. And that's why
Another drink, Gary.
That's why you keep crashing into fire engines.
But they're not. Yeah. It's not flawed because if you look at it, a Tesla driving down the road in cruise control mode, right? It will turn a corner now. It will turn at a red light.
Look at the
tree.
videos.
Only if there are lines painted nicely around the corner.
Yeah, that helps. That does help.
It has a homing feature for hitting police cars.
You won't be allowed back, Richard.
We don't want to get too much into this stuff. I've been following in detail, but to give you an idea, there's a US Navy pilot, very well respected. She's called Missy Cummings, and she was brought in as a consultant for the US. To look at Tesla safety, and she was literally trolled off with threats off Twitter. You know, she
Yeah.
So
we actually all know Missy from back in the day.
If it was, and this is what they're dealing with. So basically, the safety is being looked into. There's really serious issues around what's going on there, and part of that is the fact that it's been oversold for what it can do. So it's a very simple system. It will always be a very simple system with that hardware that's installed now. You would have to put new hardware in to be
like lidars.
And whatever other sensors you need, but you can't do it on cameras alone.
It's the Skydio of cars.
This is digressing anyway.
Here's the thing, though, Ian.
Look, hang on. We're gonna start Tesla World next week. This week.
Before we get on to it, anyway, what I want to point out is watch the video. So these in the last few weeks, there has been one that's the steering wheel. The users had to fight it back as it tried to go towards a pedestrian. So it isn't the smartness you're thinking it is. So do actually watch the videos of it being used in beta.
Go and watch
pedestrians are nuisances anyway. I'd give them extra points for that.
Tell us the rest of the story. You just bought an ID3.
Now, John,
I think FPV.
I never get his name right. Doverons makes a great point in the comments about if you give your drone pilot the information, maybe he's not going to use it because he's not trained enough or whatever. But I might counter that myself in thinking I'd only ever feed him that. I wouldn't give him all the tracks. I'd only give him the ones that were a problem. But that's a different kettle of ball games, really, is operator training and safety and all that sort of thing. I think we can begin to say there's actually big holes in training at the moment. You only have to look at the UK policemen who
last week,
Canadian
police,
or the Canadian police.
At least the UK police didn't hit their own helicopter.
No, they didn't.
Or the US police who hit a lot of
Or-
aircraft landing.
And the Canadian police hit an aircraft as well. So yes. So what we're saying is, don't be a police operator.
Can I jump in one thing for a minute, just
Go on,
to go back onto the autonomy
Back to the
thing?
cars. Yeah, go on then. Yeah.
No,
All right,
nothing to do with cars. But on the drone side, I think I think we will see autonomy, but it'll be used. It'll be used where it's safe and where it's practical, because there is no point where you're doing freight and you're doing that over the oceans between countries. You're having a pilot sat there for all of that. You could have that autonomy in that, and you could have a override by PV loss. And if something goes wrong, you could dump your plane in the sea and nobody's injured. So it's a very different situation there than when you're talking air taxis. I mean, I don't think air taxis are the. I think the economics of that will prove that they don't really work anyway. And certainly what we're seeing coming out of China doesn't work, because they're basically getting Archipilot, banging it in a frame and building it always for some reason with the props at leg height, just so they can slice your limbs off.
Why do you think Chinese people are so short?
But I was going to say, if you try to land as well, you're going to end up decapitating somebody. But yeah, I mean, what we're seeing there is the poorest side of the industry. And then you've got your designs that are more like conventional aeroplanes, but obviously they do the vertical takeoff and then switch modes. So there'll be some stuff that comes out of it, and there will be degrees. There'll definitely be complete autonomy at some point, and I don't think the human flyaway will stop that, because they will look at it as the company and they will argue that particular company wasn't following the processes that you should do. So, for example, if you're using hardware that isn't certified for manned flight and you're using that for manned flight, you can say, well, actually, no, you hadn't met our standards. So that doesn't have to tar it for the rest of the industry. But having said that, if you did have that kind of thing go down, say for example, because the Chinese keep wanting to come over to the UK and use our airspace, and we know why. It's the publicity and it's to get investors. But if you had one of these air taxis over here and it crashed in a city like London and someone was actually killed of it, then you would have the problems, because the press would get onto it. And you'd have your Daily Mail and everything. And the hysteria, you would have trouble.
End of the day, we already all fly in automated planes. We just need to remove the pilot. The current planes can take off, fly to a destination, and land themselves. So they just need infrastructure. So what would happen if you remove the pilot from there?
The only reason the Philae Rotodyne failed is it didn't have an autopilot.
Yeah.
Louis got such a good point to make, because we all do this every day. But the reality is, what makes that possible isn't just the aircraft; it's also all of the supporting ground infrastructure. So a lot of these aircraft can fly effectively. I'll say autonomously, just to set people off in the chat, but they effectively can take off, taxi, land, do everything they need to do. But they're prohibited by that from regulations in the majority of destinations, because the ground infrastructure can't support them. So the question on ground vehicles like Teslas is another good one, because it's to really ask a bigger question, which is the vehicle itself all that is required in order to support the level of autonomy we all want to get to?
That's what Mercedes has done now to get level 3. They only are level 3 allowed on smart roads, whatever that means. So the thing is, what Tesla is doing is much more difficult, which is to be autonomous everywhere and not relying on existing infrastructure. What do we want? What do we want to have the small vehicles to do? To be able to rely on an existing infrastructure, or just guess where they are? That's the main question.
Elon's comment today was pretty interesting, saying that that people don't report the lives his system has saved, which it might be true. It might be true. It might the simple system might have stopped a few people overcooking it here, there, and everywhere. But then my instant thought when he said that was, well, you've sold the system in the wrong way. Then it's not an autopilot; it's a safety system, and that'd be good enough. They've oversold the autonomy of it, as it were, and they should have sold the safetiness of it, like somebody like Volvo probably would. I'd just like to get to a couple of comments before we go too far down this.
Gary, when you do, have a look at FPV Steve. He's made a very good comment that I think most of us here would relate to.
That smart roads fill their own potholes. That would be a nice one.
That's the one, because I've said this jokingly, but I genuinely, seriously mean it. If somebody had an air taxi and they had just flashed the firmware, I'm not getting in it. Simple as.
It's just firmwware, yeah.
It's
like with FTDI.
Guys, it's just a matter of habits. In how many airports you take the train that has nobody at the controls?
Yeah.
And you fly from terminal to terminal, and you fly. You ride on terminal to terminal on an empty train. So it's just a matter of getting used to.
How far can a train fall?
But here's one thing. So every time I go to get on a plane, and for a long time now, I always check my ticket, because if it says a certain company name, I will not willingly get on it. I will not book the flight. So if it says Boeing, I will not go on that plane in a big hurry.
Oh,
Just
another guy that is against plastics? Come on.
Yeah,
we are already through that. Plastics are good.
But,
and hang on, let's go back to the comments here. FPV behind it, Richard. So here we are. I'm going to put this one up. Why do I need to use your app to fly my FPV planes and quads outside of controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace below 100 feet? Come on, Richard. Why? Oh, why?
Well, the simple answer is you don't, right? We don't make anyone use any of our apps. But if you want to know what the piece of airspace is like around you or where the hazards are on the ground, you're free to pick it up and use it. I think where people are starting to see us come into effect more often is when, you know, an airport or a facility like a national park, or in some instances a big grounds owner says, I don't want to allow anyone to fly my drones here because I don't know how to talk to them all. But if you do want to fly here, could you apply through this app? And the unique thing about us is you can apply through us, but actually because we're an open architecture, anyone can develop an app of their own, or they could even just include it in their own website or another solution that you prefer every day. You know, even folks like DJI could take our applications and just embed them and make it look all DJI like and give you that service in their apps as well. So the reality is you don't have to, but the fact is most people do, because it does give you that little bit of extra safety just to know what's happening around you. And not everyone needs to.
It's official, Richard. I officially hate you because as I live in the intersection of three airports, I get all reds around me. So
you're welcome, Louis. That's us sending you a message. Those airports aren't real. We've just put them on the map for you.
I know.
Red just means crash carefully.
Yeah, Richard, though, one point I'll pick up on, though, which I think is not entirely fair with what you're saying. People don't have to use your app now. And the problem is we've got governments, and we've seen, and we can see the DFT's emails online. When the Gatwick thing happened, it was politicized, and that's in the emails. And in fact, there's even a email from Nat, and it's saying, and he's talking about something about how do we assist you with the political situation. It was political rather than safety, the word used. And this is the thing that concerns me. Once all these, once there's systems and there's the software and the apps in place, all it takes is MPs to be arguing with each other. So, like we saw at Gatwick, the first thing the Labour MPs was doing was going, oh, this Tory government, the rubbish, they haven't put in enough strict rules around drones. That's why it's all happened. So once you have that situation ongoing, if you've got software solutions, then all it takes is the DFT to say, oh, well, we'll just to look tough, we'll just mandate that everyone has to use these on any drone of any size in any situation. In fact, after Gatwick, even worse, no consultation whatsoever. There was a change done to the law to put, so you couldn't fly a 250 like 4 miles away from an airport. So literally someone that's going to be flying a Barbie drone in the back garden, their kid would have to call up air traffic control. That was the reality of the law that was put in. And that was put in as like a technical error. Oops, we forgot to put this sentence. And it wasn't. It was a political change that somebody put in there to make the DFT look tough. So what I'm throwing at you is, whilst you say now you don't have to, you couldn't categorically say that it wouldn't be mandated by government in future that you would have to use a UTM where there isn't really the need. It's just we're looking like we're being tough on something. You get where I'm coming from?
I do, and I think it's hard to disagree, right? But I just want to, I guess, countenance some of that by saying I agree with you. In fact, I've given evidence in Parliament in the UK back in 2019 where I said the problem is we don't understand the problem, and everyone is trying to regulate against that right now, and so you're getting incorrect, solutions, quote unquote, being proposed, like registration as a problem for the specific threat of rogue drones. To which I think I'm on record somewhere. You have to. I'm sure someone will fact check me. Where I said, well, actually, I think you'll find that if you're going to do bad things with a drone, you're probably not going to register it. So it's not actually the right tool for the job. And you see that. I mean, that's just one example. I don't want it to detract from the overall point, which is you see the political side driving what is happening from the design side. If you're just looking at the problems that need to be solved and the domains that need to be solved, you don't come up with these mandates for people. In fact, quite often you say, well, recreational users, no one really cares about. Like, no one needs to know about what's happening for an FPV user. If the FPV user, however, wants to go up to 1,000 feet directly next to Gatwick's runway, for instance, they probably have a concern about that, and they probably have a right to think about it, and maybe have a right to be involved in the decision, or at least in the UK do, because they have an FRZ today. But I agree with you. I think there is a danger that the wrong things get mandated. But I don't think, just to be really clear, and I hope you won't see thou shalt use drone assist, because drone assist is a tool to support decision-making by conscientious drone pilots. And it's then designed, and we're making a lot of updates. I think we mentioned very recently on another YouTube channel from Geeks Fun, a really good channel, that we were investing about £1 million of our own money updating drone assist to enable electronic applications and things like that, because we don't want to see the airspace closing, and equally we don't want to see it only supporting one particular type of app. I'd hate to go fly at Manchester or to go fly at LAX. You've got to download the LAX flight application app, because then if you're a prolific pilot, you'll have millions of apps installed and 1 million different registrations. So I agree, on that point, that people are knee-jerking and the politicians tend to drive. That's a real problem. And I see that a lot. I see it particularly in counter-drone, where you get fear driving everyone's mindset. But do you know how you beat fear? Facts. And facts are really hard to come by, particularly when you stick your fingers in your ear a lot.
Facts are out of fashion.
In this domain.
Facts are overrated in the woke society. You can make statements of fact and get cancelled for it.
The best, aren't they?
I mean, this is the problem: is getting facts to politicians, and the trouble is the people that are advising the politicians obviously aren't always the right people. I think it's Professor Dunn who's one that's.
Oh yeah.
I can't respect anything he said for the fact that he went to the House of Lords. I think this was back in 2015, and told them that a consumer drone in the US had killed somebody, which is just a complete falsehood. He was using the Align heli, Acro heli, and they're not the same thing. And it's a really unfair thing to do that. And I think if that's your level of credibility and evidence you're going to provide, you shouldn't be in front of people in Parliament. But unfortunately, that's the kind of guidance we're getting, and that's what really worries me. We haven't got that many sensible voices. I just add to your point where you mentioned that you're giving evidence. Where you do, there's the Parliament TV. You should really take the bits off. You can use it part of your own social media, but I think an Attitude Angel, where you are there, you should actually take that off yourself and put it out on Twitter and social media, and then people can see what you're actually saying to the powers that be when you do. Because I know, because there was actually but it was when Charles York was being quizzed about Gatwick. Prior to that, I think he was managing director of Metis, and he was actually really good and really balanced and really fair, which is good to see from a counter drone company. Because the funny thing is Metis, because I look into the Gatwick thing, they assume I'm going to be mean and nasty to them, because I've tried to ask them a few questions. They won't answer because they think I'm just trying to use it against them, which is it's not the case at all. I just want to get straight answers. But I did notice on the Parliament TV that he did a really good piece, and it is on my to-do list to download that bit and upload it at some point and just tag them and give them a nod and just thank them for the balanced way they talked about drones. But yeah, I do have that concern about the people that have the ear of the politicians often are giving a dramatic over. I mean, the professor done stuff. It was talking at a degree of stuff he'd seen Terminator. It was like he'd watched back-to-back 1980s sci-fi and was just presenting that all as realistic use cases.
So were you the advisor then, the sci-fi advisor to him?
What's that, sorry?
For you? Were you the sci-fi advisor to him then?
The thing that frustrates me with this is I could go in front of politicians and scare them witless about it. You know, someone said, yeah, well, I'll just pay this load of money and go in there and just come up with all the nonsense you can do and fearmonger. To fearmonger is really, really, really easy. It's easy and it's lazy. To actually be pragmatic, a voice of common sense and balance, that's actually the tough bit. And I you know, a hat tip to anybody that does that. And I think, Richard, I'm sure you'll know I'm very suspicious of UTM because of the way politicians will use it. But I have to say, in fairness, the way you always talk about it and come across, you're always you understand both sides of it, and you always come across balanced. And that's just what I'd like to see more of. But I'm kind of disappointed though there isn't more from the drone industry of really shouting up and having a voice. I just don't really.
Everyone's terrified. They're terrified of making the CA angry and
then
they're losing their rights to fly.
I'm not scared.
CAA scared of the DFT as well, because really the CAA he can't be a drone expert and then say, yes, I buy the entire thing of Gatwick. There was a drone for all that time. There was a drone, even though the same system that protects RAF bases was there, that it wasn't on radar, it wasn't on thermal, it wasn't on RF. You cannot say you're a drone expert and say you accept that, because it's nonsense. You know, you could say, well, maybe there was one for the first sighting and then it's all blown out of all proportion. But the CAA won't take any other line than it happened because they don't want to upset the DFT. And what's the point of having a regulator that's supposed to be a subject matter expert on something they haven't got the spine to actually speak about in a balanced manner?
I hope in the new year, because I know some things about appointments at the CAA, I hope that the things will change a little bit. The seesaw will lever down into the side of good in the new year. I know some pretty balanced people are going there, so fingers crossed that's going to happen. But who knows?
Just to respond as well, I just want to say thank you firstly, because it's really nice to be called out for someone who's trying to add a little bit of balance into a typically unbalanced or even biased conversation. But I think the piece that I've become most jaded with over the last 2 or 3 years, because I see a lot of it. I see it on the commercial side, I see it on the industry side, and I see it on the regulatory side, and then you have the security side as well, is just the sheer amount of bias that everyone walks into almost every conversation with. And like I say, you get it in all these groups. You actually also get it in the media quite often as well, when they have a particular story. Like Gatwick's a great one, for instance. There's a lot of clickbait to do with Gatwick, right? You only need to mention Gatwick and drone, and everyone's interested. But the reality is, you know, if I'd have been in that conversation that you've been in there, where you've got this supposed airspace expert who's absolutely adamant there was a drone, I said, well, okay, let's assume there is. What do we need to do about it? And how does registration help that, for instance? Because it doesn't. So sometimes I think you have to give up pushing against it and just go with and say, fine, someone is clearly lobbying here for something that they have, and they have perhaps far deeper pockets than us, or they've been doing this for much longer, or they're much better politically connected. But I am an optimist in that I hope that eventually the best solutions are the ones that will actually win. Because the reality is the vast majority of the utter crap, excuse my language, that gets pushed in this industry doesn't work. You know, if we talk about remote ID, great idea in principle, completely nonsense implementation for it, right? I mean, I see some people advocate for it. Security folks, we need registration, we need identity, love it. Why do you need to broadcast the location of the pilot? Why don't we rotate the IDs? Why are they always the same? You know, why are we following all the design problems that we've had with ADSB, for instance?
Yeah.
Why is it an open protocol? You know, all of these types of things make very little sense when you're just looking at the problem. But if you then bring in other angles, I'm not saying I'm privy to every angle, but if you bring in these other angles, sometimes you can see it skewing towards a particular business model or a particular investment that someone has made. And that, I think, is what is really, it's got this industry stuck right now, because you've got some massive investment, and massive investment buys you attention, doesn't it? If you get hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment, you're going to get a meeting with a politician, principally because you're going to go to that politician presumably and say, I could employ 1,000 people in your neighborhood, or I could go somewhere else. So could I have a lunch meeting, please? Right? I'm fairly certain that type of stuff happens. And you see that, and I think you see that sometimes in the announcements that get made, or even sometimes the questions that get made when the CAAs of the world do public consultations. You know, I think they're very leading. So, yeah, I am, as a company, we're typically quite politically unbiased, but we're certainly going to be wading more in the new year to put down a stake in the ground, really, and say, but that isn't necessary. You know, if that's the problem you're trying to solve, this is how you do it, and here's a demonstration showing that works. So can we move this conversation on, please? You know, we don't need to have this one. Registration isn't the answer to all of the airspace problems, because if it was, there would never be a plane crash. No one would have stolen planes and flown them into buildings, would they? Because they were all registered aircraft. So, you know, there are plenty of examples and anti-examples. We just need to get the basics sorted right now, which is access and an agreement on how people can go fly, and whether that's the same for whether you're flying for fun or whether you're flying for commercial gain, from our perspective.
Okay, Richard, look at that. We've got over an hour. I invited you on to talk nonsense. We've talked Altitude Angel nearly entirely, or UTM nearly entirely.
We did Tesla.
Lots of Tesla. You've acquitted it very well. And all the time we've done it whilst Ian Mad there's got the new Autel on his desk. That's what it is, isn't it?
It is. It is the new Autel.
It is the new
grey Autel. Actually, you say about the Autels, they're starting to ship today. Interestingly, they are starting to actually ship out to people. I saw some posts on Facebook with people talking about, well, a dealer saying that they've got them in stock and ready to go. So we should.
So not actually yet then.
Well, they've landed at the dealers, so they've said they're going to be shipped in the next 2 days.
Oh,
so
they've
in time
for Christmas for some folks then. So go on then. Tell us about it. Tell us about the Mavic 3.
What Mavic 3?
Oh yeah.
It exists. Look, I've very kindly been lent one by Ben at 3DXR for a couple of weeks over the holiday period. He's lent me his city model. I've managed to get a couple of flights on it today, in particularly poor weather, but nothing you would want to look at the image quality on. But yeah, it's a tough one. I'm going to be doing
complete to download the footage, or you're still downloading the footage?
Actually, I'm okay with the footage speed. It was transferring at 673 megabytes a second, 0.6 of a gig. So it would be 20 minutes to offload a full SSD at that rate. But you have to make sure you've got a
full battery.
The battery, yes, but your PC needs the support as well. You know, that it's very important you're using the high speed USB Type C port, and it has to be USB 3.2 as well. So it needs to be the fast one. But look, from an aircraft point of view, it flies a bit differently to the other ones. It's a bit of a combination. It flies a bit like a Mavic and a bit like the FPV drone in GPS mode. It feels quite detached, actually. a bit more robotic than I'm used to the DJI aircraft feeling. It almost, any stick movement has a latency before it has a reaction. And it's not that there's latency there. It's almost that the aircraft is dampened, if you get my meaning, before
I call
it does its move.
floaty. It seems like it's floating.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, well, it is really, and actually, I'd say the PIDs are a bit low on it because it's quite all over the place in its own prop wash as well. When it's coming down, it is a bit floaty. I think it's been done on purpose, and the thing to remember this is a consumer aerial photography drone, so a lot of this is actually good behavior. You want it quite dampened. You don't want it to feel sharp, and you could almost argue many of the previous models have been overly sharp for that kind of use. They react a bit too quickly. You don't want sharp movements in aerial photography. You want it to be nice, slower movement. The drone flies okay. I think it could be improved. I can't really comment on the camera, although I will say I've downloaded footage today in a poor day, and I'm seeing nothing groundbreaking. I'm not seeing anything that I think, and that's on ProRes Raw, that I think, wow, that's amazing, even in this light. It was okay. So if I sat there and had spent £4,000 on that, wanting an improvement, I'd have been disappointed. I think
So
for me,
is it half as good again?
No,
as the previous one?
no, I'd probably say
because it's like double the money, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say if it's 10% improvement over the Mavic.
Oh
double the
God,
money.
you're getting sponsored by them. You're
Well,
getting
10%.
a glamorous review of the drone.
10%. I'd say the image quality. Now, the thing to understand though with ProRes RAW is if you need ProRes RAW, then you're going to want this drone, because ProRes RAW has a lot of benefits from a post-production point of view, from an editing point of view. For instance, I've dropped the footage on my machine tonight, and it's beautiful to work with. It just works. There's no H.264 and H.265 is very heavy on resources on your computer, especially H.265, whereas ProRes RAW in Resolve just drops in. And so for people who need that, it might not be about image quality, if you know what I mean. That just helps their workflow. But then you've got the pain of offloading the footage for 20 minutes. The RC Pro, actually, this is the best part of the drone, is the remote controller. And the irony is you only get it with the expensive one.
I believe now they're offering the new RC Pro.
Yes, with the A2S, and that's going to be a dream combination. This is probably the best remote they've ever made, and it's so much better than the smart controller. It's fast. It works almost like an iPhone in the sense of it. You don't feel the lag on any of the apps and everything. I think, I've got 2 weeks to spend with it. I want to do some proper footage and recording. I think, early doors, what I can say on the Mavic 3 is it is very much like upgrading from an iPhone 12 to an iPhone 13. That would be the simplest analogy for people who use iPhones. Is it better than the Mavic 2? Yes. Is it better in every way? Probably. But quantify how much better that is for the cost. For me, what I'm really interested in is, can this replace my Inspire 2? That, for me, is the big question here. Not that if it's better than a Mavic 2. There's loads of people with enough money that they don't care how much it costs. You'll see them all over Facebook. There's posts and posts of people going, I've just bought my first drone and I've bought a Mavic 3 Cine. Their first drone, and they've spent $4,000. It's insanity. It's crazy. So those people are going to buy it anyway. They have to have the latest gear. They have to have the toys. For me, the real question is not about the Mavic 2, but is this a better buy right now if you're a commercial operator or someone who's looking to get the best footage they can with that ProRes capability than the Inspire 2? And I've flown my Inspire 2 this week, and I forgot just how good it is. I put some footage up, and I just did a bit of filming early evening, and the footage is just outstanding on that aircraft. And if this can get close to that, then it's got a market. But there's also a lot of quirks with it. Active track is frankly shocking, should not be used. It's that dangerous right now. Don't use active track. Don't even turn it on. Don't turn it on. It's shocking. I've got a bit of video which I'm going to share where it was sitting there just moving around by itself, and I was jumpy that it was going to fly into some trees, and that was me walking along a beach. The live feed is the best I've ever seen. It's like looking at the footage on the SD card. DJI's wireless technology is now as good as what you're recording on the Mavic 2. It's that good. Would I upgrade from the Mavic 2 Pro? Unless I needed ProRes Raw, no. That's a real simple answer. If I needed ProRes Raw, then yes. Would I be tempted to sell my Mavic 2 Pro and the Inspire? I am tempted, but I need to see the footage a bit more first. But that's a lost game, whatever you do. You're losing money. It's like buying a new car and selling it 12 months later. You're constantly losing money on it.
Okay. Just to make it easier for you, for 500 quids and shipping included, you can send me the Inspire 2.
And there's a lot of people who take it off me for that as well. The one thing, the observations, the little things I did notice is it feels very cheap, and it isn't cheap, but the thinness of the plastics is astonishing, and I can only think it's to get below that 900 grams that they were targeting, and the casing is almost hollow. It feels very thin, and in fact, if you grab it on the sides, it bends. You can actually bend the plastics in. It's thinner than the plastics on the FPV drone. I can see why it's disintegrating on impact. I've seen a few quite spectacular crashes, and I can see why. But then again, it's not designed to be crashed. So
my worst impression of the M3 is I was having it side by side with the Hotel Evo Pro 6K.
Yeah.
And oh my God, it looks so solid, the Hotel, compared with that. Even the Air 2S, I had the Air 2S, that one, Hotel 6K, Hotel 8K, and a few others that I cannot comment. And the cheapest,
lovely handbag. The ones with the handbags, is that the one you mean?
To be honest, this comes with a bloody handbag. This comes with a backpack. Don't you know? Look at this. Look at the bag this thing comes in, right? It's got this lovely like cloth, and this is heavy as the drone. It's got this really nice cloth bag, but if you're hip, like I know you guys are, especially Bruce, because we know he likes to get down with the kids, especially when he's doing clapping push-ups. If you haven't seen it, but you can open this bit of it up, right? And there's a backpack inside. Like you can actually convert it into a backpack. So when you're climbing those mountains and doing all of that stuff, like we all do.
So you get fined for flying with intent.
Flying with intent. So I think it's probably the first drone from DJI where you starting to see stagnation kick in, and not because of the company, because the technology has now got so good. If you look at the step from the Mavic Pro to the Mavic 2, it was big, and I don't mean the sensor step, I mean just the quality of the product, the image quality. It was huge, but there is that plateau point that we've now hit, and this is the beginning of that. And I think, as Louis said, the Autel Evo 2 6K is going to give this a real run for its money. There's nothing spectacular in the image quality on this already. I can see it instantly. You know, there's nothing here which I think, wow. So it's not about the image quality. What you've got to decide on this product is about everything else. Do you need that 30 minutes plus a flight time? It flies long enough that I got bored and cold, and I only got it down to 50% on battery. Honestly, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. I was that cold and bored. It was like, I don't want to fly anymore. It's got some good stuff. It really does, but it's tough. It's not a lot of money. I don't think the product's expensive. I just think the upgrade path is now questionable. If you're a Mavic Pro user, no brainer. If you're a Mavic 2, and we'll have to see on the Inspires if it really can replace it.
I don't think. My personal opinion is that currently, with the current solutions, the Air 2S gets results as good as that one, except for the ProRes Raw, and the Evo makes it much better than that one. I was doing precision testing of flights with that one, I was shooting some share screen window. I was doing testing at several distances from a target, and the results are much against the M3.
Yeah, there is a couple of things as well that I have a feeling we're going to see a little bit of a. I don't mean bait and switch, but I think we're going to get a change, and I can really see there being a Mavic 3 Pro as well. I can actually see that happening because it is missing some stuff that most pro users would expect, and a lot of it's software. So for instance, one of the big ones for me is you can't map a button to bring up your battery cells information. So the way I always fly is whenever I take the aircraft take off, I hover there for about 30 seconds to allow the VPS to get the image of the ground very well and let the battery settle in and keep an eye on the cell voltages, because you want to check there isn't one sagging or there isn't a cell going down.
I think that train has left the station. Their current tendency is like that.
Yeah,
we haven't seen that for quite some time.
But that's how I fly, and you can't map it to a button. The info's there, but you can't map it. The image stuff on the screen is too small. For some reason, they've made all of the flight data tiny along the top as well, really small. And I don't know why they've done that, because there's plenty of real estate on the screen. So there are some quirks for the commercial operators, but I can't say it's a bad product. I think it's a good product. I just think you've got to really question what you want if you're looking as an upgrade. If I was starting to buy a drone from scratch today, it's got to be the Mavic Mini 2. I think anyone's insane going out and buying this as their first drone. You are off your chump if you go out and spend this much money on your first drone. It has to be a Mini 2. Learn the product, learn how it works, and you're not going to throw money down the drain. If you're looking to upgrade a Mavic 2, I'd hold it back. I'd wait for the next one. I really would. But if you want ProRes RAW for your workflow, not image quality, because I'm not convinced the image quality is much better. And Philip Bloom has hinted at this. For those who follow Philip Bloom, he's said that, hinted at, and he hasn't done part 2 of his video yet because unfortunately he caught COVID. But he hinted that the changes between H.265 and ProRes RAW are so minimal, it just doesn't warrant the cost. It simply doesn't warrant the workflow and cost. If they are going to be making the A2S with this remote, and that is going to be an absolute stonking buy for people, because it looks like they've made the smart controller obsolete now, and they're then shipping the A2S with the RC Pro. And if it is the same as this, that's going to be a stonking combination.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's what you want to buy then? Is that controller?
Yeah, I think the problem is everyone's got caught up in the bigger sense. If you want longer flight time, it's a no-brainer. If you want a quieter drone, but the A2S is much quieter than the others, where you can look at that. Really, the reason to go for this above the others is if you must have that ProRes RAW for your workflow. I think anything else, it's the A2S.
It doesn't support, none of the mapping apps support it yet, do they?
No, and I'm not convinced the camera's great for it. I'll be honest. The zoom I can comment on, actually. I'll talk a bit about the zoom. The zoom is it's not shocking. It's good enough to find a body on a beach. That's what I would be using it for. It isn't a photography camera, that zoom camera. It can get results, but what it is actually really good for is if you wanted to identify something from a distance. It's soft, the image is pixelated, but it would get the job done, if you know what I mean. And as I said, the reason I say a body on a beach, if it's search and rescue and something like that, there is a benefit to that.
That's what that's not the body you were thinking about.
So is it worth it though, Ian, if you don't have something like the GVC where the C markings are going to come in? Because you've only got it now. You buy it now, you haven't got it for long before it gets relegated.
I think it'll be retrospectively. The interesting thing will be because if DJI, if they choose to then C mark them from next week, so let's just say next week production is C marked, Nothing changes other than the mark on the frame. The user doesn't have to worry about that. Who's going to check that? Who's ever going to know? Who's going to be? The user is still flying no different. If you bought, they're not going to change the hardware to make this comply, because I think that's why it's under that weight, and that's why they've cut every millimeter out of the plastics as much as they can. So there is a reality where you're going to have a bunch of drones released on the market where one sold last week won't have a C marking and one sold this week will have a C marking, yet the only difference is the stamp on the plastic. So for those users, they naturally fall under retrospective. And even if they don't have to worry about it.
You're just losing a business opportunity. For all those users that bought the system before it was officially C market, just return it to DJI service, and under a modest fee of, say, £250, we will retrograde it to C marking. So you're going to buy a C marking sticker for £250. Come on.
But to be fair, though, if it's DJI, their repair prices are actually very good. So the problem is they'd probably do it for 25. You know, they're rebuilding arms on the FPV drone.
Stickers are expensive. Come on, Ian. Stickers are very expensive. You have to see all this.
They said here, Louis, that they don't want it to be a sticker because it's too easy to copy.
It's too easy to copy.
They said it wanted it engraved onto the hull in some format. So what's going to happen is, thanks to right to repair as well, you're probably going to find that someone that's very thoughtful in China will retrospectively go around making new hulls for aircraft with the new C2 marking engraving on them.
Who's going to check? Who's going to actually check any of this? You know, look, we're going to have this transition. We're going to have this transition period where there are aircraft that will be one and the other. Don't get me wrong, there'll be new aircraft, but DJI are not going to make a C version of this. They've just put this through the production. They're not going to go out and make huge differences to this to comply.
Let's make a bet. Let's bet on it.
I'm not convinced. I think they've made this ready to go. The way this is probably the first aircraft that is out and out ready. You know, they're not even selling the additional lens in Europe because it puts the aircraft over 900 grams. There's an additional lens available for this, which makes the camera wider. So you replace the lens on the front and you make it wider. They won't sell it in Europe because it won't comply with legislation. And that's only because of the weight. The ND filters are fine, but everything else isn't.
Just to jump in to be a smart ass, but I'll tell you who would check. Any copper that have been told to check the drone pilots at a race course, they check.
Yeah,
You'll pay a percentage of the fine to Karens, so you'll get Karens running all over trying to check for the C markings of your drone.
I'm not even convinced we'll have C markings in the next 2 years.
Ooh, there's a prediction.
Bold
It just goes on.
Hey, is this the last show of the year? So Ian's already going ahead with the predictions.
It keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. Look, the manufacturers can comply overnight. It's easy for the manufacturers. You give them a specification, they have to meet it. It's not difficult. This is all getting tied up in legislation, and that's where it just keeps rolling on and on.
Do you know where the biggest problem is? I think the DFT and the CA, they haven't got anyone that can check to confirm. So there's no standards body yet for the actual drone side of it. They've got all the standards, like you said, they've got everything. But also remote ID is their next biggest hindrance because they can't decide or haven't decided exactly what that's going to be because they've got a few niggles with that still. So it's, you know,
remember, the UK is a tiny market. And the UK is tiny. DJI won't make a drone specifically for the UK market unless they absolutely have to. You know, they're looking at Europe. Europe's the big push on CE right now. UK will be what it will be. Europe is the big one, and they're still not. You know, when is the cutoff date? When is this actually meant to be coming in?
So after this, I think it's June 6th or something. It's June anyway, 2022. Everything after that date is meant to be C marked that's sold on the market. But again, even YASA there's no standards body yet. And they're still debating remote ID, which is
it's the VW approach of compliance, isn't it? You self-compliance. My product meets that specification. I'm going to put the stamp on the side. We know how well that goes.
You're just killing the opportunity of some nice guys to enter the civil service in UK. Come on, CAA hiring a bunch of Ians to get the technical certification under CAA rules. Come on.
Hang on a minute. I'll just go to my diary here because if I look at my diary, there will be a party organised for sorting this out over there. As long as there's cheese and wine.
As long as there's cheese and wine, it'll be done. Yeah.
Yeah, then get anything over there.
Hold on. Richard is making a good point.
So
how is it in UK with the CE marking? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, and that the CE marking is still a standards thing. However, it's meant to turn into the kite stamp. So we're meant to be converting to the kite stamp. But the CE stuff is still coming slowly. It's still going out, but the kite mark coming back kind of thing. However, these new standards bodies have got so much to go on with, and it won't be a kite stamp on the drone. That is hilarious, isn't it, Richard?
I thought you'd abandon that idea because then nobody from Europe would bother selling anything there because they're not going to bother to get something CE marked and then put it through your standards authority there as well. Yeah. I thought that had all been abandoned.
And also what's interesting is, so for the C ratings, every model plane that's sold in the UK, all of them have got to have their C markings done as well. Because all model kits, anything at all that flies in the UK, be it a model helicopter, be it a model plane, be it a drone, it's all got to have its C rating on it. Bizarrely.
Remember, when these things happen, it's often a year. It takes a year for transition to kick in. So stuff will still be sold without it. It's because they'll be allowed to. They'll have a transition period for what's already in
now.
Yeah, well, it's meant to be now.
We're in it. We're in that period. Allegedly, we're in that period.
I wouldn't be concerned about buying a drone on CE marking. That wouldn't bother me right now. At the end of the day, you got to buy what you need, and if the rules, the goalposts move, then they move. The Mavic 2 isn't. None of them. They're not going to retrospect the Mavic 2. Well, that's too heavy anyway. I don't see them retrospecting anything other than this and the Mini 2, but I wouldn't be shocked to see a Mini 3 in early next year anyway. That could actually be their first proper C-rated drone. I can see that happening.
Ian, one thing I would jump in with, though, you might not personally, but I think most commercial operators would have seen the chat on the pages won't buy it because of the worry about the CE marking. No one wants to invest in something they don't think is going to last anywhere near the lifespan of the drone. So I appreciate what you're saying. And I can see these things being delayed, and I think the mention of remote ID again, I think that was ill-conceived anyway, but getting all those kind of things right.
Yeah.
The
UK shelf.
What is the lifetime of a drone on a Prosperous commercial operator? 6 months? 1 year?
No, but
oh god, my Phantom 4 Pro is 2015.
People I know fly them even longer. I mean, look how many people are still. He's got quite a few people still flying even.
I mean, someone that works every day with the drone.
This is what I mean. People working every day. They're not. A lot of people aren't throwing the money about. I mean, you look at a lot of photographers that are working every day. They're the actual people that are not the people that go out and buy the latest, greatest gear. They're like, this is doing my weddings fine and that. And they're actually usually the really tight ones.
No, I'm not going to buy this because, listen, our drones are flying an average 8 to 10 hours a day. They don't last 1 year.
No, that isn't typical. There's commercial operators going out doing roof inspections, whatever else. They're not flying that kind of time. They might be half an hour or an hour a day. So it depends on your use case. I mean, you're slightly different because you're doing more complex things. Like the 3D mapping and stuff, and that's a different use case. So I think it's one of those things. It's down to the commercial use case. But obviously there is a lot of commercial use case around simpler tasks where people, and those are the kind of people that are often buying the DJI gear anyway, especially the smaller drones. It's kind of,
and it's interesting, and this almost closes the door on the Cine model, this as well, because let's be realistic, most people who are buying these smaller drones are using them for either online footage or YouTube, you know, estates agents, stuff like that. And this is the weird thing with the Cine model. It sits in a weird position because it's an expensive £3,000+ product, yet the people who are going to want to use a drone like this, who are not the high-end film companies who just want it to dispose of, are not doing what needs ProRes RAW. You know, most of this stuff will be fine in H.265. You know this yourself, Ian. We're running, you know, you got GH5s, I got, you know, we're both the Panasonic guys. It's very rarely you're recording in anything. How often have you ever used the 400 megs? I bet you've never used it.
Well, you don't have that on the S5 anyway, so...
No.
And I'm not GS5 anymore. So I don't use those necessarily high bit rates, and I don't have to. And the thing that gets me is a lot of these people, they probably don't understand. It's always the thing, though, isn't it, with the internet and the YouTube, and you must buy this gear. People are believing they've got to go and buy ProRes and actually need it, and they don't. And you have a look, the actual production companies in the US, for big TV shows, I mean, like The Blacklist, I can think is one, and some of the movies, even recently, Invasion, which is an Apple show, a brand new one, has used amateur drone footage. So as long as you give them footage that's 4K at 24 FPS, that's generally the requirement. There's very few out there that are saying it has to be ProRes. That all they care about is, will it get the shot? And usually a drone shot's usually a quick clip, 3, 4, 5 seconds max. So your eyes aren't even going to necessarily realize this is a little bit.
You're not going to see it, are you? You're not going to see, and this is the funny thing. And this is the weird thing with this product, because it sits in a weird place. I think the sensible move, if anyone is looking at one of these, is wait for the new Fly More pack to come, the non-Cine with the smart controller. That is going to be the one to buy, not the Cine. The Cine one is a weird position on this product. It is a weird one, because even if the footage is 20, 30, 40%, okay, and I know, what ProRes is going to give you is more latitude in post with regards to grading. That's what it's going to give you. It's not going to give you much more detail. It's going to give you improved codec, but more capabilities. But if you're exposing it properly in the first place, and you're focusing everything and getting it as best you can, it's 10% margins, and for the cost, it's simply not worth it.
Ian, ProRes does not help when you misfocus. So
no, I know, that's what I'm saying. But if you get everything right on your SD card footage, it will be absolutely good. It's not going to be perfect, but I think
it's a problem of bandwidth also. That's why they need the Cine.
The biggest benefit to ProRes is editing. I'll be honest, it's the editing process. The biggest benefit is the NLE. You just drop it in and just get on with it. You don't have to encode it.
And for what you're saying with the type
to these cards, the problem is you cannot stick one of these.
You'd be shocked when I can stick one of them, Louis.
Yeah. One thing you've mentioned, though, if it takes 25 minutes to get the footage off, that would be a little bit of an issue, because funnily enough, I did a drone edit for somebody this week. I did the edit within an hour, so that's from downloading the files, doing the edit, and uploading the file at the end. So if I had to spend an extra half an hour on something, that would matter. So it's like you say, if something looks apart and the client's happy, that's all you need to do. A client isn't demanding, I want it in ProRes. And like in my case, I like my anamorphic, but there's no client saying, I want you to film this in anamorphic.
No estate agent's going to be saying, I want this in ProRes RAW, please, or I want my roof inspection in ProRes RAW. So the question then is, where is this footage going to be used? And that's the weird bit.
A subset of a subset of a subset.
Yeah, it is.
I think you've got basically a few proper production company kind of people that are going to spend the time in post and are going to want that, and they're going to be the market. But I think a lot of it is just generally, I'm your latest gadget show off, and then that's who's buying it.
Yeah, for me, the best buy would be the standard model with the smart controller. I think the smart controller is a must because they've cheaped out on the other one. But the standard model with the smart controller, if you were going for it. If not, buy a Mavic, buy an A2S with the RC Pro. I think you'll be very happy.
Well, there we are. There's the words. There's the words.
Yeah.
We have it. We
Consumer
have it
advice
here
for Christmas.
for Christmas.
I do think it's going to be it's a difficult because if this is how things are going to be, and this problem is going to hit everyone. Now, Autel are in the same boat. They have a 1-inch drone, which they're going to find it very hard to top in a version 3. DJI are going to be in this position now for, frankly, the next 3 or 4 years. Okay, if we think the lifespan of this drone is going to be 3 years, what's next? Another bigger sensor. They've almost hit that point now where it's good enough for almost everything. As I said, the biggest benefit is how long it flies. It's too long. It literally is so long you get bored.
Oh, come on. That's you that you're flying on mild weather. Come on. I had a Mavic 3 flying in 14 meters per second winds, and it barely did 25 minutes. So.
No. But okay, yeah. So you're going to get the next, the next version is going to have another 5 minutes flight time. If we estimate every drone, if you actually look at it, 5 minutes has been about what they add across the board on each iteration as it goes forward. Although they say something like 40 minutes is complete nonsense.
You mentioned something about Autel, and I was looking at the Autel drones, and one thing that really impressed me, and I believe they can do much better than what they're doing, is that the gimbal itself looked very solid and very powerful. So as much more power on the gimbal than the current cameras need. So because they have the dual sensor one, the 8K one, the one with the thermal. So I believe they over-engineered the gimbal so they could go with a larger, better camera in a new version. So we might be able to see a difference.
Yeah, but again, the problem is, anyone who uses cameras, the difference, the sensor in these is the same as they use in the RX100s, the Sonys, the small Sonys, and they are amazing sensors on those cameras. MFT is bigger, like this has, but it's not night and day anymore. It's, you go from MFT to full frame. That's a much larger jump, and it's something me and Ian have done in the last 12 to 14 months. It's not made your photography better. It's not made the image quality 100% better. It makes doing certain things easier, or it gives you some other benefits in other areas. But if you stick the same size sensor, the same megapixel sensor between, say, MFT and full frame next to each other, in many ways, actually, the G9, which is the Panasonic, does a better job in some conditions, even than the S5 does. So the sensor is a road to an end that no one wins. It doesn't make a massive difference.
Of computer photography versus real photography. I'm not going to follow that trap again.
But the sensor being bigger will only again be a marginal difference. And again, you're compromising the sensor anyway because it's got a stupidly small lens on it. So going to that size of sensor was probably pointless. They'd have been better putting a better lens on the 1-inch sensor rather than cramming this tiny lens that they've had to cram on a 4/3.
Yeah.
Ooh, so there's lots for you not to like there. Is what I'm taking away from this.
It's a difficult product to run out and recommend if you've got the last version. If you don't own a drone, if you've got a small drone and you want to get yourself a Mavic for the first time, a bigger Mavic, and you've got a Mavic Mini and you want to get the best
go
camera
on eBay. Go on eBay and get a Mavic 2.
I'd say there's but it's just not a good upgrade path. But then again, nor is moving from probably the last 2 generations of iPhone to the latest iPhone. These are never good upgrade paths. They're just incremental.
That's what's shortly to be super rare FPV drone, because I bet there's not any more of those coming. Used for, I bet when these containers are empty, when they're gone, they're gone.
It'll be a collectible, mate.
It will be. It will be very, very
not
soon.
Broken, and even rarer, it is one that has not been broken yet.
Yes.
The last thing I'll say in it, I think it's a drone that's been designed for the YouTube community, and very little thought has gone actually into using what they've put in, and that shows in the SSD, that shows in the behavior of the app, some of the pro features that are missing. It's a YouTuber drone. It's been designed for the person who wants to say, I've got the latest and greatest.
And also shows,
I might have to use a snippet of my own thing. It's the YouTuber drone. There we are. What a fantastic snippet that'll be.
And also shows, you know what, Ian, the lack of the SDK support. That's
Is the A2S got it yet, Louis? No.
No Air2, no Mini 2, no Air2S, no Mavic 3. That's the current sad state of the situation.
They need to add a vlogging mode where it hovers like 3 feet in front of your face as you walk along. That'd be great.
It will.
What a feature.
It has.
Without cutting your face up.
I noticed a comment that Steve, FPV Steve says YouTube misses kills the video quality, but he's missing the point. These people don't care about that. They just want to do the amazed face thing where you go, I'm trying to get myself for cameras, you go, and then you hold the product and you do that on YouTube. You go, I've got the latest thing. Look at me with my amazed face. And then it's the bragging rights. It's not really that I absolutely need this. The only people need it are say your production companies that's probably sending it off to Netflix, and even then it's debatable whether you actually need it, because the stock footage that's being bought is in H.264 and H.265.
Yeah, that's what you go and buy off Story Blocks and all of those places. You're not downloading ProRes RAW.
Why aren't you using Peter? What is it? What's that? There's a whole lot of good stock footage online now. These free places. I've been using a bit of it. It's great.
It's
right. Well, we've put that one to bed. Then let's put that one to bed because I want to go to bed. So what, have we seen that any news stories this week? Anybody seen anything?
Just to go back briefly, as it's a little bit of an exclusive, and it's something that you picked up on a previous episode. But do you recall when the Gatwick Tree Ball redacted document came out, and the only thing in it was saying the catering? If any learning, the learning from Gatwick was we need better catering facilities. Well, what has come out is it looks like the forces that have billed Sussex Police have underbilled them because some of the forces have missed out the travel expenses, so the vehicle and the petrol. They've got a mutual aid thing, so basically that should have been charged for. And any officer that's actually had to buy a meal whilst he's been on duty, which could be hundreds or maybe even more, they should have been paid for in the aid as well. So it looks like they've actually been underbilled. But I just thought,
so we foiled that with, can you include the sandwiches, please?
Oh, well, I've actually been doing the FOIA on the cost to each force. So that's how I've spotted that some of them are underbilled. So it's just going to be interesting because I'm trying to total up how much the underbilling is. I think it's going to be under 10 grand, or probably even under 5. But it was just interesting that little bits of money for this operation are falling down the cracks.
Can I just say, right, if Netflix do a thing on it, I hope they do like a comedy section where the police officers are trying to get decent food. They should do like a little sketch in the middle of it all where they're trying to get decent food for the police officers that are on duty, just for the hell of it. Or at the end of it, how much they're charging them for the bill, at the end.
But it's, I mean, we laugh about it, but if you bring in officers from surrounding forces in the middle of the night to defend us from imaginary drones, they will need sandwiches and stuff and heat and warmth and accommodation for senior people and whatever. And that will soon mount up. It will soon mount up. Of that, there can be no doubt. Now, I noticed you on Twitter earlier, you mentioned dear old Avon and Somerset actually responded to something quickly. Are you at liberty to say what that was?
That was the cost. So what I've been getting back, because everyone's been difficult about any operational details, which is, well, it's not reasonable to be fair with the questions that are being asked, but given that's being blocked, I thought, well, for the time being, I might as well cover the other side of it, because what we know is actually it's cost somewhere around about £1 million when you put in the couples compensation as well. But costs have been missed because no one's costed in the RAF deployment and bringing their kit. So I want to kind of put all the additional costs up and say, actually, this is the complete cost that those few days ended up costing the taxpayer. Just because, again, it's just having a complete picture of it and saying, if this happens in future, there's lessons that can be learned.
Well, I think for me, I suppose it's gone. I suppose I can accept all this fuss and trouble and whatever if lessons have been learned and they can be shown to have been learned and a proper action plan, should it happen in the future, is rolled out. But that's not the case.
I'm going to say one thing I have noticed. It means I honestly have no idea that's going on. But they've already made one of the CUAS guys that they got to look after the new CUS systems. They made it redundant because it's been updated on LinkedIn. So it makes you wonder what's going on there. Because apparently, and what I'm hearing in the grapevine, is cost cutting because there aren't so many flights. That's one of the things that's getting a bit of chops back. So I just hope there's somebody other than a cleaner that's actually monitoring the thing after all the
Richard's UTM's put him out of a job.
Oh no!
UTM Gatwick for Gatwick is put out of a job.
No, Richard's UTM is at Gatwick at the minute, and you can get flight permissions via it in an experimental fashion, I believe. Is that right, Mr. Parker?
That is correct. Yeah, you absolutely can.
So that's the irony of it, isn't it? Richard's now providing a service where, as an operator, you can more easily get your permissions, to everybody.
One of the benefits of that is that Gatwick are able to very quickly look, or other airports are able to quickly look and see who's actually got a permission before, or let's just say they can use it as a variable when working out how to respond to an incident. And what we're trying to do is to help the sensors that they have around the area to know about authorized operations so that everything just doesn't look like a big red shiny target, which is currently what happens, right? You deploy tens of millions of pounds worth of sensors and everything it detects is a big bad problem. Whereas if you have a bunch of people who've actually done the right thing, the very first thing you want to do in a security situation is to discount them from what you're looking at. You want actual information. So that's the other kind of secondary aspect of having something there that helps to make sense of what's going on.
At the moment, then, is there an API where your system connects into the Auto Plus, and so that when something's up, if there's a ping here, it will say this is that approved thing? Or is someone going to still at the minute looking at two screens and working out this is the one on the UTM and this is on the counter UAS?
What I can say about that is that we've had that conversation and that we have an interface and we have the ability to provide that capability to Gatwick or other airports if they require that. And hopefully that's something which we'll see lots of airports take up, because I think it is, it's the next step, right? If it follows that drone use is going to go up and more people are going to use them, then these very expensive sensors are going to get worse over time because they're going to get more things to look at. And the majority of those things are going to be good things. So they're just noise from a security perspective. And, you need that intelligence.
They kind of are, but you wouldn't know whether it was a legitimate drone. I'm thinking they would know whether the ping was a drone or not, because it tracks it on radar and then it pings the visual.
Oh yeah. So whether it's a drone, I get it.
Yes. They wouldn't know whether it was approved or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Did we give it permission, for instance, or is it a known drone, a known person, but is it off its plan, for instance? Is it gone rogue, or is it a flyaway, etc., etc.? So it helps to kind of, again, provide a bit more information, a bit more intelligence into that security response, rather than in some airports what you might see is a bit more of a less coordinated response, shall we say.
Are you involved then? You probably won't say too much, but my understanding is that there's going to be a national policy for infrastructure for the counter UAS. So in fact, the system that's at Gatwick now might actually be completely put in the bin and a new system in its place, because there'll be a single sort of set of hardware and software. Is that what you're involved in? So you'd be facing into that kind of thing?
we're party to a few conversations that are occurring on the security side, but I haven't yet. I don't think I'm breaching any confidentialities by saying this. I wish there was a lawyer here right now. But I haven't yet seen any system which nicely blends the cooperative with the uncooperative side. I've seen a few decisions around what people would like to see, mainly from the uncooperative side, which tends to lead that conversation. But again, I think the real approach here isn't to just look at one half of the coin. Doesn't matter which half you look at, you're only getting half a picture, and that's typically what we see is being pushed, not just here in the UK, but globally.
What's security risk?
Sorry, say again.
What security risk?
Internet's falling apart. Oh, on my back.
Well, that's a good question, right? I mean, the reality is, I think what an airport is most concerned about is an aircraft of, a drone being somewhere it shouldn't and causing injury to an aircraft or to people at the terminal building, etc., etc. It obviously makes sense, right? That's a risk. Yeah. But the reality is, it's got to be quantified, and the reality is, it probably is going to happen at some point in the future. Whether it's tomorrow or 10 years is another question. But we'd all be upset, right, if we were on an EasyJet flight about to depart and a drone got sucked through the engine. So you'd expect the airport to do something about that risk. But then again, it can happen with a bird. So
yeah, I was about to say, you've got more chance of birds going in the engine than a drone. Let's just do reality, like a flock of birds, right, which all airports have to deal with.
Yeah,
they end up in plane engines far more often than drones. Funny enough,
you're pushing on an open door. I agree with you, but I think having sat in those arguments, the types of arguments that I think a security person might then say is, but no bird is an intentional terrorist, right? Well, no bird is intentionally going to fly into an engine to end its own life.
But does intent matter? If the outcome is not the intent is irrelevant, is whether it happens or not.
Yes,
to an extent, but again, if you then apply motive to that, right, and you say, well, actually, there's this new technology, it's very scary, no one understands it, but actually now there's a whole bunch of people who want to do really bad things, and they could easily fly into an aircraft engine, which I personally still maintain would be really tough. I think that would be really tough, but I'm not a pro pilot like you guys, but I think it would be really hard.
You're more likely to die from a suicidal airline pilot.
I would like to see them prove that. I would very much go, come on then, let's get a plane on a runway, right? We're going to taxi you down. Let's see if you could do that.
I tried to approach that from an automation point, because I was trying to work out, well, okay, I'm not a great pilot, and that's one of the reasons I don't fly so much anymore. But I'm great with software. And I thought, well, is it possible potentially to automate a drone, using something like Autopilot or what have you, using a sensor feed to understand, because ADSB planes broadcast their locations, right? So is it possible to make them join? And then just the sheer latencies and the inaccuracies to line it up when something's moving at 180 miles an hour on a runway. I can process the maths thinking about that, but I timed out because it was a fun pub evening quiz for me. But for other people, I think there is a real concern.
Just blow up the loft of some pigeon fancier who lives by the airport.
And this is one of the problems. So counter drone, they're going to go, well, they'll start with airports, which is fair enough. I understand, there is let's say on the likelihood of it happening, it's very improbable. Okay, straight away. But the risk is a 5, because if anything goes wrong, it's a 1 times a 5. So in my eyes, it's absolutely, minimalistic. Yes, if you're in another part of the world where hostile things are going on, I understand there's more chance of going wrong. But, most of Europe, the chance of this happening are so slim. And as we know, once that plane starts thundering down that runway, there's very few drones that can match it for speed. You're talking a plane that's going to do 180 knots. You show me a drone that can fly that quick to start with, because there's not many. Do you know what I mean? Or even a racing drone will do about 120, maybe just over max. And the skill, just the sheer skill to put it in the right place at the right time.
Oh, guys, you're looking at completely wrong perspective. Haven't you ever heard that you know from where to where the plane is going to fly? So you just have to fly at an angle. So you can fly at 5 knots and still hit something that goes at 180.
Mr.
Come on,
Johnson
guys.
goes today.
I can't do that math in my head.
Guys, I don't think it's actually thinking about it from a risk perspective, as we've probably just agreed as armchair experts here, that it's probably really difficult to fly a drone into a plane, but it's probably not, or a moving plane, it's probably not that difficult to rock up in a car park, you know, next to a runway and fly that vehicle into a tank full of aviation fuel or a plane that's still boarded. And I think that must be terrifying to the security services, because all of the security at an airport is perimeter based. It's putting up big fences and having thousands of cameras. It's not that particular risk. So I think that's probably a bit of a concern.
I mean,
don't you think?
the reality though, and we've said it before on here, it's the drone and the payload. All the drones now are small, and even if you're going to self-build, you've still got limits. And the reality is, your terrorists aren't wandering around the streets with C4, and that's what you're talking about. It would have to be a state actor to have the kind of explosive detonation potential to put on smaller drones. When terrorists have looked at this, and ISIS have, they've had to get cars because we've
triggered all of the FBI watch list, haven't we, tonight? You've said terrorists.
Yeah,
I've avoided it a few times.
C4, it's all been there.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though.
We're all going
Can you imagine, though?
Allah Akbar.
Oh God!
You would need that C4. You would need that C4, and if that's in the country and it's
I really hope you don't plan to go to USA in the recent. In the next months.
And prior to you cracking on, it was only all the people in Richard's pub that were on that watch list. Following
that aim, I think it probably isn't, again, right? And I'm just going to go out there and say it. I don't think maybe it's even the fear of explosives and things like that. It's probably the fear of interruption. Like, it's really expensive to close an international airport for an hour. A lot of people lose a lot of money.
What about 3 days?
Well,
it's just a mere threat.
Gender reveal party.
Then, if it's the mere threat of a drone and then not knowing if it's still there, that's a problem, can keep the airport closed. Isn't it better potentially to invest in technology so they know for sure? That's another way of looking at it. Maybe it's just let's make sense of what's happening.
But that doesn't work, Richard. So here's the thing, right? So this is how you stop an airport. You pick up your phone, you call the tower. I can see a drone, lights in the sky. This can shut down an airport. Now, let me finish, right? You can then bring technology in. You can then bring counter UAS in later, and you can still see those
from
lights
YouTube sent me a book about what I'm allowed to have.
That hardware says there's no drone there. Which one do you believe? Do you believe your eyes or the hardware? Let me get Gatwick. You go with people's eyes.
But this was the problem there, and this is the lesson that needs to be learned. Even when the RAF came in with the gear and they were saying there isn't anything there, they weren't listened to because they weren't controlling the operation. They were only a liaison point. So they're saying there's no drone here, and the airport is continuing to be closed. And even if we saw on the weekend where someone's put in a hoax, we think it is bomb hoax, you can close the airport down, so people can close it down without even having an asset. But I agree, the counter drone should be there to say, we're telling you there isn't a drone there, but it becomes completely pointless if you're going to override that because someone's saying, well, I've seen a light in the sky. So there does need to be robust processes and trust in it as well.
You can go even worse. So I could ring up and go, there's a drone in the sky. And then Ian could ring up the same airport 5 minutes later and go, oh, there's a drone in the sky. And the counter UAS system saying there's no drone. Now, Rich is going to phone up and he's going to do the same thing. Then Bruce, then Ian, then Louis, and then Gary. If you had enough people, you could shut down an airport even with a counter UAS system running.
Well, I think just to try and put a bit of devil's advocacy in this conversation so we don't all sound like horrible terrorists. To my knowledge, there isn't one drone detection system yet that can easily spot all drones, right? You get certain drone detection systems are better at spotting certain types of drone. Yeah. So even if the airport had, this shiny $10 million system, it might have a blind spot for a very small type of vehicle. And again, I think that's the challenge. And I think all security initially, that response is about information, and the more of it you have, hopefully helps, but you need quality information, right? And when we're involved in counter-UAS, it's not to do that piece that follows identification and classification. We want to do the piece that, yes, we think that's a drone, and yes, we know who that is, versus yes, that's a drone, but we have no idea who that is, right? Because we run your authorization system there, and no one's got a permission for a target in that location. That's at least a better response, right, for the security team at that point than panic, pandemonium, 10 different screens, 10 different sensors, plus eyewitness accounts and potentially security services independently not being coordinated. And I think that, for me, that was a learning from I have to say, Gatwick, but you could just apply that anywhere, right? If you have too much information and none of it's connected, you've got no information at all.
Yeah, very much. Very, very much. Yeah, I thought that at the time. It comes down to the decision not to use the RAF's data is almost the inverse of the decision to go with whoever said, "Oh, it's a drone, right? Shut everything," because that was also a
difficult. Don't you think, though? Like, I don't know. I mean, if I was in that position, and I'm not defending Gatwick, I don't want anyone to think of that. I'm just trying to think of the other side, but.
Yeah,
well, you have to make the call. The sensors all look clear, but there's a load of eyewitnesses still phoning in this drone, and then there was an accident. Because I think that would have been the process, right? People would panic about being the guy or the girl.
I think we've got to remember on the first night it was blowing a gale. Well, I'm not sure if it was a gale, but it was windy and it was raining. It was a horrible night. So the chances of something being there were pretty remote, and anything after that, I'm afraid, was Chicken Little. However you're going to put it, every man and his dog was going to ring the airport.
It's a real shame that
they've seen something.
The issue is if someone says, "I'm seeing a drone and it's a quad, it's got 4 arms, it's red," it's something descriptive. I think that's fair enough, but that wasn't the case. People saying, "I'm seeing the lights in the sky," and they're doing reports of drones at the same time. There's an MPAS in the sky with its lights on. And then we're seeing the photos that said a Gatwick drone. It's got aviation colours, which are different to drone. So you know full well it's a helicopter that's been photographed. So it's just the fact that within the eyewitnesses, there wasn't a robust process there, which you should have. I mean, knowing now where you've got your Falcon Shield and you've got the camera on that, you can manually look on that anyway, I guess. But it's having that. That's why I said there should be process around it as well. But it shouldn't be. If you're saying I've seen a drone and you're saying I've seen a light, you haven't seen a drone. You've seen a light, and I think that's what should have driven the decision.
That makes a lot of sense, and I feel like there was a tipping point somewhere. I can't put my finger on it on a specific event, but at some point, something unexplained in the air stopped being something unexplained in the air, and it became a drone by default. Like, it became much more acceptable to say I've seen a drone versus I've seen a light, or what would typically have been called.
I think it was a security guard.
Alien nuts, but it would have been.
The security guard called it. The security guard said there is a drone on the northern side of the airfield, or whatever it was. And I think it was a security guard that named it, shall we say?
Yeah. And also, interestingly, all the sightings that kept the airport shut were at night. So on the DFT record and everything else, all the Freedom of Information, all the records that show the airport was kept shut for was because of sights at night. So from 8 a.m. or 8:30 in the morning up until it got dark, there was no sightings at all officially stamped down as a rogue drone.
Are you allowed to fly drones at night in the UK?
Yes.
Yes. Funny enough.
As a hobby flyer. But yeah, that aside, the thing that annoyed me with this was when he's seeing lights, why wasn't the understanding that drone lights are small powered LEDs and you wouldn't be seeing them at that distance? The only way at those distances lights were being seen were to have proper strobes installed. So you've got some evil genius that's managed to accidentally light his drone up with loads of strobes, which doesn't seem a very covert way of
disco lights, Christmas lights.
Wasn't there? There was an activist group, wasn't there? I think, was it last week or the week before that was news, wasn't it? Who were threatening to fly drones again somewhere. I don't know if it was Gatwick, but
they're the ones that shut down all the roads as well, isn't it?
Oh, is it
they camped on the roads?
Great Britain guys, is it, or something?
Those Muppets.
It's not a name. Look, we are definitely talking nonsense. We've gone over 2 hours and we're talking
Yeah.
nonsense, and that's a
Come
clue.
on,
That is a clue.
Oh,
Merry
brilliant.
Christmas.
Oh, no.
Merry
I wi-
Christmas. Look at that.
I went to
And-
great
and
expense to have this made for the
and now-
program.
exactly what I was going to say. And now from the multi-million-dollar 3D rendering factory.
This is what you
You
call
really
visual
fucking-
effects. This is what you pay money for.
You're very, very good.
ProRes Raw.
ProRes Raw, was it? I don't understand what that
I shall
is.
cook it later.
Yeah. That is true. Oh, look.
Oh, look, gratuitous cheers,
shot.
Shotty. Yeah,
Look
Christmas
at
link in the
that.
description.
Good
I don't
now.
know. What do you do?
Look at you guys. Oh,
He's
there's
got to do
the
the
other
same.
He's advertising the chair.
Hang
How
on.
long have
I
you
was
been wearing
looking
that
for
hat,
something.
Bruce?
I couldn't find
Yeah,
it.
we know. Yeah, we believe you.
Yeah.
I was genuinely. I didn't know where it's gone.
Right,
Right.
you're looking for the affiliate link.
Yeah.
No, those ones are dried up on this. I was thinking of making another video, to be honest,
My wife was saying something
Jimmy.
similar the other day.
to give him a pump
Wherever
again.
you are in the world, I'm going to stop this lot now. Have a very, very Merry Christmas. Be safe out there. Omicron's not that bad. It's already going down here. It's already on the way out. Only 8,000 cases today. It's on its way out.
Not here.
Please, yeah, well, you
Gary.
won't try and ours not in the first
Gary.
place.
Take good care of our banker that is on your prison over
Just the former banker that is over here in prison. Well, is he in prison? I don't know. Hopefully he's
there.
having
Yeah,
a lovely
it's in
holiday.
prison until January 10th. I think you'll come up with a funny walk.
Oh, there's
Better
I'm
than
sure
some
he's
hotels
innocent.
in South Africa.
I'm sure he's innocent. I'm sure he is. I'm sure we can find a way to get him out. Dear viewer, have a very Merry Christmas. Look after yourselves. Gentlemen, thank you. And hopefully we'll see you all again, 2100 GMT. Next week, once all the turkey has been consumed and mince pies eaten, sherry drunk. Take care. Look after yourselves. See you next week.